Greetings, everyone, and I would like to say namaskara this
I
time
would
because
like
we have a guest who's a
to
native of
guess who's a
Karnataka.
native of
So, welcome to this new episode of Suits and Sports. My name is Ryan
sports.
James, and I'm joined by Mr. Rohan, who is our associate editor. And on behalf of Global Sports Policy Review and Sport of Education, we would like to welcome our guest for today, who is one of the most prominent sports lawyers in India. And he's currently a partner at LawNK, also known as the Law Offices of Nandan Kamath. It's Mr. Roshan Gopalakrishna. So, hi, Roshan, sir. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Rohan. Thank you for having me.
Rohan,
Okay, so I think yes, sir. I thought so starting off with, so why exactly, like, how did you get interested in sports law to begin with, right? So when did you first like discover this? I mean, out of all the fields of law that are presently there in today's, I mean, in law today, how did you actually get interested in sports law and follow this path towards sports law?
So I think a lot of this has to do with just my time in college. So around 2004, when I was in the second year of college, NLS at that point had a chair in European Union law, and which often ensured that young academics from Europe would end up taking credit courses at NLS. And obviously, a lot of them also were football fans. These were the days of Roman Abramovich just taking over Chelsea, and as a Man United fan, you didn't know what the future had in store for you. As it turned out, there wasn't much the future had in store for Man United. But I think, in addition, just to following whatever was happening on field, right, the recruitment of players and just blowing literally other teams out of the water, which Man City now are much better at. But in addition to that, I think we were about 8 years out from the Bosman judgment. And these were things that you hadn't heard of till you were discussing this over late night Champions League matches, and there's someone who is watching the game with you, but also explaining the legal aspects. And after a point, you just say, "Wow, this is something really interesting." I've always been a huge sports fan. I played sport with some degree of, I think, difficulty or whatever, but I was what you would call a John O'Shea type of player. You could complete team man, put me anywhere, I'll play as long as I get to play. It didn't really matter. Wasn't in it for the glory in some sense. I just wanted to play. But I think it gave an interest in just to follow sport and work on the commercial aspects of it. Uh, in terms of the subjects that you were taught in college, I think the professors were open enough to let you work on research projects on topics related to sport. There were many internships that I could take up because Bangalore had many sports management companies even then, and still continues
So
to
so
have
what
many of.
what was your first sports law internship then? And also,
So it was with.
welcome, Subhrajit, sir.
Hi, Subhajit.
Hello, sir. How are you?
All well. How are you?
I'm good, sir. I don't know you remember me or not. We met once, though online, in Professor Schonstar class, who was in mentor.
Not
So
possible. Yeah, yeah.
you and another ma'am was there. I'm forgetting her name,
Roxanne,
sir.
Roxanne,
Roxanne ma'am
Roxanne.
was there. Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that time you were talking about broadcasting. So I know you are one of the specialists in India who deal with the fact of broadcasting because your lecture was like a mind-blowing lecture. I will rather say, like
In a good way, I
even
hope.
without yeah, it's like it's even without book, if you even go to the lecture recording, like you will get everything.
Sorry?
So, like even without book on broadcasting law, if they hear your lecture, what you have given the small span of time, they can know the most of the thing what's happening in the sports broadcasting area.
I think there's a very famous quote attributed to, I think it's Bruce Lee. Don't fear the man who practices 1,000 kicks once, but fear the man who practices one kick 1,000 times. I think that is the logic I'll go with. I think I've just done it so many times that a lot of it is just there. It's just there in my head.
But sir,
Any,
I want to ask you a
go
question
on.
which is regarding how you came into the domain of sports law.
I can't hear you too well, Surajit.
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, a little better.
Okay, so I was asking sir, like, how you came into the, so we normally ask this question to every like post of attorneys and lawyers, like how you people
And
came to
very
the.
properly.
I think what
Can you guys hear
Subhrajit,
him?
I think Sir's breaking up that a little bit, but I think again what Sir was just trying to ask you is how did you get into the field of sports law again is a standard question, but what you were answering right before this.
Yeah, and I think you asked me about my first internship. So that was at
Yes, that also.
a celebrity management company called Sport, which was Mahesh Bhupati's venture, and which still is Mahesh Bhupati's venture. And what they were working on at that point, obviously, they were managing a lot of celebrities. And I think from a legal perspective, they were quite involved in actually one of the defining cases around Section 27 of the Contract Act, for clauses in restraint of trade and post-contractual restraints.
So both sports
So
as
there
well
was
as
that, and
entertainment law.
correct, yeah. And they were actually bringing in WTA events and ATP events to India at that point in time. So that was, I think, when I first took the plunge.
Subhrajit sir, still not audible. All right, sir. So further, like I think this is like a very, very commonly asked question, especially for when like you say I'm interested in sports law. Is sports law like as a sports lawyer, are you particularly isolated towards one sport, or do you deal with issues that come across a variety of sports in India or across the world for that matter?
I think obviously it's a pretty niche area, right? So when we started off, I think sport in India at that point, in terms of the clients who could pay you, meant cricket. So this is 2009, and we were very lucky to work with one of the IPL franchises from 2009 onwards, and they continue to be one of our clients. But the fact is that I think with the franchise model coming in, essentially what you're looking at is just ensuring that you are well aware of how a franchise model actually works, and then looking at the different pulls and pulls of the entire pyramid of sport. And I think it's essentially in India, what's happened is that the same model has been taken across different sport, whether it's football, whether it's kabaddi. I think even there's Kho leagues now. There's so many others. It's been tried in hockey. It's been tried in badminton. But obviously, you need to understand just how the entire sporting system works. I don't think you can look at just franchise model in isolation. I think what we've also done is that's enabled us to work in grassroots sports, for instance, through one of our affiliates. It's called the Go Sports Foundation. We've done a fair bit of policy work as well in Karnataka with the Karnataka Knowledge Commission. There was a report that we brought out in 2015 on what Karnataka's sports policy should look like. But I think overall, just awareness of the commercial model and where it sits within the larger model of sport. Essentially, just I think understanding that it's a part of the larger model, and it's not the model in itself.
So then speaking of policies, so like currently if you look at sports legislation in India, either the Indian Sports Code of 2011 or the newer one 2017, what do you think can be done in our country to improve the condition of sports and help it develop as a whole? Because we see problems like sporting federations not implementing the sports code, no arbitration clauses to court of arbitration of sport, and so many more issues. So what do you think is the main thing that needs to be done to help improve most sports, especially the up and coming ones in our country?
You'd say a couple of things. The first is placing the athlete at the center of sports policy. Because very often the athlete is on the periphery, right? It becomes more about the administrators and the commercial sponsors, commercial partners. It becomes more about the governing body itself. I think if the focus were to shift towards what the athletes want and how basically the rest of us can just work towards ensuring the better system for the athletes, putting the athletes first. And I don't mean this just at the excellence level. We're not looking at just athletes right at the very top. But you have to look at what's at the grassroots and say, hey, why is this not working? And look at that and say, okay, unless you build the grassroots, you're not going to get your people at the top. Indian football, I think, has this issue now. The question is, who after Chetri? Right? But the fact is that even a Chetri or a Baichung before him, they're the results of the systems that we have. And I think in cricket, we don't see that issue anymore. We probably could be one of those countries playing 2 or 3 teams simultaneously. But that's because I think all said and done, the BCCI did put its head down and say, okay, if there's so much money coming in, we need to ensure that a lot of it goes to the players and goes to players at different levels. But obviously, other systems need to be put in place. I think athletes need to feel secure. They need to be safe in the sports environments that they're in. They need to be protected from issues like bullying. They need to be, I think, trained for life after sport. And I think they also need to be made aware of this in terms of what we see this all the time. But an athlete makes it to the top, then gets signed by, say, a management agency. But at that point, you also need to know what you're signing up for, why you're signing up for it. Because the life that you may have at the very top, maybe 10 or 15 years, if you're lucky. And I think psychological support for athletes at all points. Because it is lonely, and end of the day, I think every athlete has to think for themselves, right? Even in team sports, even a sport like you can take cricket, football, anything. There is competition for every position. It is a team sport because 11 people playing in 11 positions come together. It's not a team sport where in cricket you can't have 11 openers, right? That doesn't work. I think everyone understands their role, but equally, I think the rest of us have to form a team around the athletes and say, hey, we'll work to ensure that you get to be the best that you want to be. So I don't think India has an issue with talent. It has an issue, I think, with moving the talent to the next level. And the second part, I think, is looking at sport in isolation. I think sport needs to be seen in the larger context of being a public good, rather than saying sport is just for people who want to play sport. There's so many different elements to sport, right? I think more than sport, it's more physical activity and physical literacy. To people understand that there's different types of activities which are also sport. I think if you look at the inclusion of 3 sports for the next Paris Olympic Games, one of them is breaking. If even 5 years ago, if someone said, oh, something that you saw Mithun Chakravarti do on TV would one day be an Olympic sport, you would just laugh, right? But there are different ways of looking at it. As in, this is essentially one of the 2 largest governing bodies in sport worldwide saying, look, we understand that conventional sport may not even be relevant 5 or 10 years down the line. Like the younger generations identify more with breaking rather than they would with archery or wrestling. And it's also a fact of, I think, access to resources, increase in population, where suddenly what you have and what is available to you to practice your sport becomes very, very limited.
So
I think essentially that.
So, like while we're at this topic, I want to ask you, so do you think if India, I don't know if it's possible, but if you look at the American system, for example, they have a well-established system. There's the NCAA, and then there is like to get into the main leagues, you need to get into the draft. So do you think if India even Japan has a similar system. So do you think if India established a system like that from the very base level in a state where all the high schools are among divisions, where all colleges are among divisions, and have that same step-by-step procedure, would it see a significant difference?
I would say yes, because I think then we spoke about. I think I mentioned grassroots and taking things up from the grassroots, and this is a very vital aspect of it, because you obviously have clubs and other institutions which are around, but I don't think clubs are the only way for people, for athletes to move up either. And I think having a system that also ensure that athletes do pay attention to their education is going to be quite vital. Because as you said, if there are only 11 players in the starting 11 of a football team, and there are for each position there's say 5 players in the reckoning, right? You also need to account for the remaining 4 for each position who won't make it, but who perhaps may be able to contribute to sport in different ways. That's why I think anyone who's in any role in sport probably needs to have played sport to an extent to understand that it's not the same as any other field. To even as a lawyer, right? It is surprising that you have stuff like buyout clauses, for instance. I don't think any tech company can tell their CEO that we will allow you to join the competitor only if the competitor pays us $100 million. But these are issues which are seen in the context of, I think, the principle of specificity of sport. There are inherent intricacies of sport which no one really interferes with. No one tells you how wide a cricket bat has to be. They try to, but I think there's obviously certain principles and certain parameters to be followed. Systems, yes, I think that's going to be our biggest challenge as a country as well going forward. Ensuring that, right now the system also consists of, I think, the government providing strategic intervention to, say, the top scheme, the Target Olympic Podium scheme at the national level. Initiatives like the Khelo India Games. But again, all of these are at the very top, right? Where is the regular system for someone to just play sport? Or even for that matter, to access infrastructure?
So, Bridget, sir, now that you're back, would you like to ask a question to Roshan, sir?
So, sir, I just want to ask you here one thing. Just like it refers to this rank question only, the NCA system, which is we call in US is a closed league system, right? Whereas in European system, we have seen the open league system, right? Just after the Lisbon Treaty. So, sir, don't you believe like even if we consider the open league system, which is we normally in the European Union, like creating a school or you consider college level clubs, because we have seen Oxford football team is there, which is lower division. If they get a better score, they can move to the Premier League division. So, sir, even the open league system is somewhat helpful. Like, which system you prefer? Like, with so if you are into a governance body, so which system will you prefer? Like the closed system of US or the open system of the European Union?
I think at the amateur level, I'd probably say just a close. It honestly doesn't matter. I think we just need people to go out there and play. As long as there's a league and you provide them some form of structure. But I think obviously as you move higher in the hierarchy, you need to have performances and systems which are based more on merit. So the open leagues, I think, make sense to that extent. But the closed league also obviously has its benefits, right? The only reason I think the IPL is where it is because even teams who may finish last in a particular season know that there is that much money that which is coming into them. And you see the issues with European football, right? The number of clubs, especially in not in football, but I think say in sport like rugby league, for instance, where clubs have gone into administration and pretty big clubs, Wasps and others, where I think they're reliant much more on their performance rather than on any other parameters for their financial health. So I think in India, I don't think you need to worry about the kind of structure. I would say you just need to get a league system in place. And it doesn't need to be a serious league either, right? If you just want people to play, just have zonal leagues, divisional leagues, just let people play, just let more universities come in. You can do a Ranji type of, a plate and an elite division. I think we have methods in which we can do it. It's a question of enforcing it. I think it's a question of putting it in practice in a larger Indian setting. You need to identify the number of schools. You need to identify, firstly, how many of them have grounds, right? And if every school has one ground, I think increasingly every school has one ground. I actually see this so I live opposite to school, and I see this in the morning where they have one basketball court, which almost every morning is used for a laughter club, which is used for a softball team training, and which on weekends actually is used for basketball and I think karate classes which take place there. There's no space for them. And overall, I think at night their buses are parked. So even I think part of the grassroots movement is just saying having sport in your curriculum, saying it's not just something that you can't make one person jump and one person just give them a ball and say now go play for 45 minutes and that's it, you tick the box. I think if you see the inherent benefit of sport, I think it's a mindset that needs to change. Which is the point I was trying to make earlier about physical literacy and not just saying sport is different from studies. No, sport is very much a part of studies. What it teaches you, what it brings out in you as an individual is potentially something nothing else does. There's a quote, right? Sport doesn't build character, it reveals it. I think all of us have that experience where you're playing cricket and the person who owns the bat just wants to bat. He wants to bat 3-4 times even though he gets out.
Yes, sir. So linking this back, I mean, this entire concept of literally like again the batsman who just wants to bat. Like looking at current sporting federations in India, especially this recent issue with the All India Football Federation, where they literally got debarred by FIFA. So do you think that the NSFs in India again have like overwhelming control to the extent where it's becoming problematic and they're getting debarred, they're not getting recognized by FIFA. India stands out to lose out from major competitions like the World Cup, so on and so forth. So what do you think that needs to be changed in sporting federations as a policy to help prevent issues like this from happening again?
I think one thing I would recommend you watch is FIFA Uncovered on Netflix. This is probably the perfect week in which to watch it, and that kind of this covers the issues in ways that I probably cannot. But there are João Havelange, when he becomes the president of FIFA, he essentially elevates the status of FIFA president almost to head of state. And the point that many people in the program make is, why should he be a head of state, or given that that level of prestige or that level of power? He's just someone who actually has had to have stepped into an honorary role. And that is part of the issue. I think sports administration is one of those places where you see politics, use bureaucracy coming together. But that's the way it has been, right? If you saw sports administration in India for the longest time, it started off pre-independence being essentially the Maharajas who were calling the shots. And post-independence, it moved to, I think, politicians, bureaucrats, industrialists. But for the longest time, sports roles, governance roles were honorary in nature. So the belief for that the person coming in is doing it for the greater good rather than any self-interest. But rarely is that the case. It's always the fact that you're in the public eye, and which is why you'll see people being reluctant to move out of the position that they're in, because even a politician can lose his seat every 5 years. But will that really happen to the president of a federation? No, because if he gets elected with his people around him, all you need to manage are those people and manage certain votes. And I think after a point, you also realize that there is a commercial side to it as well. Increasingly, I think sports federations in India have been called, and I think not just in India, worldwide, have been questioned about their roles as guardians of their sport, but also as promoters of their commercial interests. Where on one hand, they're saying we are the only ones who can protect our sport. We lay down these rules on who can set up leagues, who can set up what are the levels of integrity you need to look at, what leagues can players participate in. But on the other hand, saying you can only play in our leagues. This is the entire issue with the European Super League. Right? That's what they were saying, that what was the biggest threat to UEFA or to global football, or I think to UEFA largely. The threat was to the Champions League. There was no other threat, right? The more the leagues, the better for sport. I think increasingly competition law is coming into the picture. We've been a little behind the curve in India, but otherwise, I think from pretty much the time of the Bosman judgment, the actions and the decisions of governing bodies have been held to have economic consequences, which then means that you can't look at everything in sport and say, oh, it's a part of this sport, so courts shouldn't interfere, or it's a purely sporting matter.
Very, very true, sir. So, you earlier on said that you're a Manchester United fan, and I'm gonna like possibly put you in a position because when I'm a Man United fan myself. So currently there is a situation going on. I would call it the Ronaldo saga. So as a lawyer, I'm gonna ask you. I'm gonna put you in the shoes of a Manchester United lawyer, possibly. So could you just give us insights as to what possibly are the legal aspects that has been breached, and or maybe you could tell us what legal aspect will come in, like what will be the procedure, or how is it going to happen altogether?
So based on, I think, the football agreements, that player contracts that we worked on, what you usually have is a clause that also limits the manner of public statements that players can make. So you would obviously want players to be involved in some manner of public statement, attending a press conference, be taking part in the post-match ceremonies, pre-match ceremonies, stuff like that. But beyond that, I think anything else needs to be a statement that the club makes on its own. And I think players also need to be very mindful of the stuff that they say. Like there is anyway a morals clause that you would implement, which is one aspect of what does a player do in the public eye, which brings disrepute to the game. And equally here, if it's a breach of the terms that the club may have imposed on Ronaldo in terms of making public statements, appearing in interviews, because I think he's also bringing the club, the owners, the other players. The question is, I think, what is the level of balance you're maintaining? What if what he's saying is the truth, right? And what if, as a lawyer, I would look at it and say, is he trying to engineer a move out of the club? And he's waiting to be sacked, because that then brings into question other issues in terms of compensation. What do you pay him? Does he forfeit his entire salary for the year because he's in breach of the contract? So obviously, I'm commenting without knowing what his contract says. But I think the argument for United lawyers to make is the fact that he's brought the club into disrepute and acted way beyond his responsibilities as a player of the club.
So thank you for that insight. So I think last question. I think this is a fairly important one before we conclude the session. So, what would you, or how would you recommend for young sports law? I mean, young lawyers who are interested, or students who are interested in sports law, to carry forward their pursuance of sports law, whether being in India or internationally, and how it probably differs. Let's say if I want to be a sports lawyer in India, or if I want to go abroad and continue with it.
I think the focus for any sports lawyer just has to be first on being a good lawyer. It's something I've learned along the way as well. So obviously, I think when you're starting off, things are much easier. So for me, essentially, I moved from point A to point B. There was literally nothing in between. So I wanted to work in sport, and there was a person who wanted to, which is Nandan Kamath, who wanted to who had started a firm working in sport and who wanted his first associate. So we actually just shook hands and we said, if we'll figure out if we're wasting each other's time, and then we'll decide what to do. This was, I think, 13 and a half years ago. So clearly, we were not wasting each other's time. But I think when there was one person I was interning with before I started working with Nandan, and who very clearly said, look, you can't be pig-headed about saying I'll do only sports work. You need to focus on being a lawyer. But obviously, 23-year-old me didn't want to listen. And I got very lucky at that point. But otherwise, even the lawyers coming in now, I think we tell them just focus on being a lawyer first. Because I think you need to get the basics of, drafting, writing, research, communication, most importantly. And obviously building your theoretical knowledge. But I'd say the focus is on being a good lawyer first, understanding different fields which are allied to sport. Increasingly, sport is moving a lot more towards tech, data, privacy, even things that you work on nowadays like NFTs and crypto and blockchain and all of that. I think it's good to know what these fields are. I think advertising and marketing laws are incredibly crucial. If you're a teams lawyer, someone comes and says, hey, I have this cryptocurrency which wants to take up front of the jersey for 1 year. I think your first instinct has to be, okay, who are these guys? What have they done in the past? And what did the industry look like in general? We're seeing that issue with FTX, right? They're one of the ICC sponsors. I think this awareness of what is happening commercially in fields other than sport is also very important, because the liability that will accrue will be on account of your local laws. There could be a product selling in the UK, and where obviously they'll be called out if they make any fake claims. But if they're expanding throughout the world and they then come to India and say, we want to advertise this, I think you need to be aware of what is happening there. Best practices from other jurisdictions.
But so, sir, before leaving, we just want to know one thing from you. Just now mentioned Manchester fan, United fan. So, as the World Cup is nearby, so I think Ryan is smiling because he is a Cristiano fan. So wherever Cristiano go, he become the fan of that club. So
Oh,
maybe he support Portugal. So so World Cup is starting on tomorrow itself. So which team you are supporting?
so I always support the Asian teams. It is my dream that two or maybe three will make it to the knockouts. So I've always, I think, supported the African and the Asian teams. Uh, as a 7-year-old, I remember watching Roger Milla score in the 1990 World Cup. That was, I think, my first introduction to watching football, and I was like, "Whoa, not bad. This seems like a fun sport." But realistically, I think Brazil have a very good chance. They probably have the best squad. I'm not a Brazil fan. I've never liked Brazil as a team, but I think being objective, I think they're no one's talking too much about them, which is always a good sign for a Brazilian team. And there are no obvious weaknesses in that squad, to me at least. Maybe Richarlison is that is to me the most obvious weakness they have. What about you? Who are you guys supporting?
Argentina all the way.
Spain?
No, Argentina all the way. I'm a diehard Messi fan, sir. So obviously I'm rooting for Argentina.
So sir,
Ryan
for
is
me,
Portugal.
I will say, I'm a Bengali, and Bengali is always divided in two sides, Brazil or Argentina. So
Argentina,
we are
yeah.
in the Argentina. I am specifically Argentina side, but if you go for European side, so that's Germany.
Yeah. You take Germany over Belgium?
Yeah, I support Germany from my like my childhood days. These two clubs are
Okay.
it's not a Messi. Even Argentina is not a Messi specific. For me, it started
Yeah.
from
Started from?
Crespo, sir.
Oh,
If
okay.
you
Okay. Yeah. Ryan, I think your turn.
Sir, Portugal, don't need to ask to you.
No, no, sir. So I've said this in an earlier interview also with another sports lawyer. I support Portugal because my dad was a Luis Figo fan. He used to support Portugal. When I was a kid, I think in India before even Ronaldo came into stardom, every small kid used to just say two teams, Brazil and Argentina. So as a kid, it was always Brazil or Argentina. But then once I grew older, my dad used to support Portugal, and then obviously right now Ronaldo's there, and they have a good squad, good enough squad to win as well. So.
No worries, we will talk after World Cup.
Uh,
Somebody is very, very confident.
So, sir, it's our last World Cup. So the team which is coming is like the Copa champion team which is coming. So they are already motivated.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
First friendly match 5-0 already.
Beat UAE, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Di Maria is in peak form.
All
Those
it
words have
needed.
been said many times.
Yeah, exactly.
don't jinx it.
All it needed was a Mario Godza substitution to end all these hopes. So I feel there are much bigger
No, it was
surprise-based
also
players this year.
Higuain's open post miss, but that's besides the point.
See, the thing was that time we don't have a good goalkeeper, but this time also Argentina has a good goalkeeper.
Yeah, that is true. That's true.
Okay, so we shall hope that we shall know we can definitely reiterate back to this interview just to see who wins the World Cup, and for sure we'll make a post on it, hoping one of our predictions go right in some way. So, firstly, Roshan sir, thank you so much for taking time of your schedule and on this Saturday
My pleasure.
giving time to us and sharing your insights, especially in regard with sports law and the sports structure in India. It was really insightful, and I'm sure a lot of us watching this will learn and work from it. And sir, so this is something we do with all our guests usually. So many a times we have international guests, we have them give us a a farewell, not a farewell speech, but just telling us, asking our viewers to like, share, subscribe. So I'm going to ask you to do that in Kannada, sir, if you will.
Like, share, and subscribe what?
To GSPR.
To your
Yes.
How will they understand if I tell them in Kannada? You want to put subtitles?
I mean, it is just like a gesture-based thing that we do. We make every, nationality-based person or different linguistic-based person tell that, to just. Or
Okay,
sir,
let me
you
do
can do
that.
it in English as well. It's up to you.
Oh, I can do it in company as well.
All right. I mean, more than happy.
We start advertising it in Goa.
They may not understand my company. I think just I don't understand Goan company. So it's for me it's almost like they're speaking in Portuguese, which they probably are. So right, here goes. तुमका है वीडियो आवडला रे? Like, share, subscribe करा. GSPR YouTube channel ला. Thank you.
Perfect, sir.
Once again, thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thank
sir,
you,
for
thank you
coming
guys.
here. It was
And all
really
the
good to
best,
host
whatever you
you.
do. Likewise.